The wind started earlier than usual that morning. I knew it the second I stepped out onto the porch, tin mug in my hand. Yesterday's coffee gone cold before I even sipped it. Dust was already curling low across the field, soft enough to blur the fence posts, into shapes that looked like they didn't belong to me anymore. I stood there a while, boots planted in the same grooves they'd worn into the boards over the years, just staring like maybe something new might show up on the horizon. But nothing ever did. I'm 48, though most folks guess older. Truth is, it feels older. I move like it costs me something to shift my weight from one leg to the other, and it does. My boots are cracked along the sides. There's a patch on my right knee that's been coming loose since spring. The only thing left on this farm that works the way it should is me. And even that's starting to slip. 3 years ago, I dug a grave for my wife under the cottonwood out back. 1 year after that, I buried my boy when fever took him in 2 nights flat. I didn't cry. Couldn't. Some part of me went quiet the day I put that second shovel of dirt down, and I've been living in that quiet ever since. Now my days are just movement. Feed the chickens, mend a fence, shift tools from one place to another, as if putting them somewhere different changes anything. It's not that I've been waiting for something better to happen. I've just been breathing because stopping didn't make sense either. That morning, the water barrel was low. The feed bag was empty. That meant a walk into dry wells. I didn't saddle the horse. She'd gone lame in the spring and hadn't gotten better. So I walked, wrapped 2 rusted wrenches, a sack of nails, and a dented tin funnel into burlap, slung it over my shoulder. Not much to trade, but enough to maybe come home with salt and flour. The road into town is just 2 miles of dirt and sun, but it feels longer when you've got nothing waiting for you at either end. Dry wells doesn't change. Same 3 dogs lying in the dust, same men leaning against the rail outside the saloon, spitting tobacco juice, like the ground had done them wrong. I nodded at a few. They nodded back. I didn't stop. It's strange, thinking back now, how a day that starts so empty can hold the kind of turn you don't see coming. At the time, all I knew was my list. Salt, flour, maybe a strip of cloth if the price wasn't steep. But that's not what I came home with. I reckon you want to know what I was feeling in those years before her. The truth is, not much. People like to talk about loneliness like it's sharp, like it cuts. But mine was more like a dull stone pressed against my chest. Always there. Heavy, sure, but not screaming for attention. Just fixed. I didn't notice it changing me until I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard my own voice in the house. Couldn't recall what it felt like to share a table without wanting to be done and gone. Even now, I don't think I was looking for anything that day. Certainly not someone to bring home. My mind wasn't on kindness or rescue or doing right by anyone but the chickens, and maybe the patch of onions still clinging to life behind the barn. I went to town for supplies, same as any other week. And yet the smallest things, the way dust moves, the way a voice catches your ear when you're not expecting it, those can knock you off the trail you thought you were on. The farm felt older back then. The porch boards sighed under my weight. The cottonwood out back looked tired without its top half, lost to lightning years ago. Even the air seemed to sit still, waiting on me to do something more than I was willing to do. But that's the thing, life doesn't ask you if you're ready. It just hands you something and watches to see if you take it. If you've been listening to me long enough, you already know where this is heading. This isn't the story of a man keeping his head down until the end. This is the story of a man who stepped into town with a burlap sack of rusted tools and came back with someone that would change the way the wind sounded on this farm. It's funny. You never see the moment you start to change until you're already halfway through it. Looking back, that walk into dry wells was the last time I remember feeling truly alone. And I'll tell you something else. If you've made it this far with me, sitting here hearing about the dust and the quiet, and the way I used to measure my life in feed bags and fence posts, then you're part of this story now too. So if you're listening, if you feel that pull in your chest, like maybe you know a little about what it's like to be empty before something unexpected walks in, then don't just leave without saying something. Drop a comment below. Tell me if you've ever had your life turn in a single ordinary day. Hit that like button if you think the quiet can be just as loud as the storms. And if you want to hear how that day in town brought her into my life, you might as well subscribe. I've got more to tell, and trust me, you'll want to hear it. Dry wells always smells the same, a mix of kerosene, dust, and old wood that seeps into your clothes and stays there long after you've gone. The boards of the general store groan like they're older than the town itself, and every hinge has a voice. I've been walking through that same doorway for over 20 years, and it's never welcomed me, just let me in. I stepped inside that morning, nodded to the clerk like I always did, and headed toward the sacks of flour stacked by the wall. My mind was on prices, wondering if I'd have to trade the funnel and both wrenches to get salt, flour, and lamp oil in the same trip. That's when I heard him. The voice came from the back, quick, oily, too practiced to be casual. I'm telling you, she can cook, clean, feed chickens, anything you want. Ain't no trouble at all, quiet, too. I froze halfway down the aisle. There was something about the way he spoke. Like he wasn't just selling, but making sure the buyer didn't think too hard about what he was buying. I leaned enough to see. The man talking was short, rail-thin, with yellow-stained fingers and a hat that had seen more sweat than rain. His grip was tight around the arm of a girl. She looked maybe 13, maybe less. Hair matted from sweat, knees scraped, barefoot. Her skin was pale under the dirt, the way skin gets when it hasn't seen care in a long time. She didn't cry, didn't fidget, didn't look at him or the man he was speaking to, or even the floor. Her eyes were fixed somewhere far past any of us, like she'd learned that looking at things too closely just made them hurt more. The seller kept talking. Name's Lahi, stronger than she looks. You can have her for $3. Hell, $2 if you toss in that hatchet I saw by the barrel. My stomach turned. Not because I hadn't seen ugliness before. I had. War, sickness, loss. They all take something from you. But there was a particular wrongness in watching someone stand still like that while the world decided where they'd go next. She didn't beg, didn't plead, just stood there. I hadn't walked into town to save anyone. I wasn't looking to bring a stranger home. Truth be told, I'd done my best for years to keep my life small enough that nothing and no one could get close enough to be taken away. But something in the way she stood, the quiet of it, the absence of fight, not from weakness, but from having spent it all already, it got under my ribs. And once something's under your ribs, you can't just set it down and walk away. "I'll take her," I said. My voice surprised even me. The man blinked. "Huh? You got the money?" I walked up to the counter, pulled the burlap sack off my shoulder, and untied the knot. Laid out 2 rusted wrenches, the funnel, and a sack of nails. "That's what I got." He scoffed at first, like I'd insulted him, but then he glanced around. No one was watching close enough to care. "Fine by me," he muttered, shoving the girl toward me like she was a mule with a bad leg. "She's yours." I didn't speak again, just turned and walked out the door. I didn't have to check if she was following. I could hear her steps, light and steady behind me. We didn't speak the whole way home. The sun was dipping low by the time we crossed the property line, painting everything in a color I couldn't name. Every so often, I'd glance back just enough to see she was still there, still walking, shoulders pulled tight like she expected a hand to yank her back any second. At the house, I opened the door and stepped aside. She hesitated before going in, eyes flicking to the corners, the walls, like she was mapping it for escape. I pointed to the side room. "You can sleep there," I said. "Water's in the pump. Help yourself." She didn't answer, just stood there until I moved past her to the stove. I made a fire, boiled the last of the oats into something thick and plain, and set the bowl in front of her. She ate slow, each bite measured, like she was testing whether it would vanish before she finished. I sat on the porch that night, listening to the wind drag over the roof. Inside, the house sounded different. There was a floorboard creak in the side room, then silence. I wondered if she could sleep. I wondered if she trusted me enough to close her eyes. I wasn't sure what I'd done, whether it was legal, whether it was smart. All I knew was, for the first time in years, I hadn't turned away from something that wasn't my problem. If you're still here listening, you can probably picture that moment, walking into a store thinking you need salt, walking out with something that changes your life. If you've ever had a day turn on you like that, tell me about it down in the comments. Hit that like button if you think sometimes you've just got to act without a plan. And if you want to hear how a stranger's footsteps on my porch turned into a life we built together, you ought to subscribe. The best parts of this story are still ahead. The road home that day felt longer than it ever had before. The sun was already low, throwing long shadows across the dirt like they were trying to trip us up. I could hear her footsteps behind me, light, careful, like she was trying to match the sound of mine so she wouldn't stand out. She didn't ask where we were going. She didn't ask anything at all. Every so often, I'd glance back without turning my head fully. She was always there, about 3 steps behind, her shoulders tight like she expected someone to call her name and drag her back. No one did. Out here, no one ever came after me, and I guess the same would hold for her. We didn't speak. I didn't try to fill the air with words I didn't know how to use anymore. There are silences that are heavy, and there are silences that are safe. I couldn't tell yet which one we were walking in. When the roof of the farmhouse finally came into view over the rise, I caught our eyes flick toward it, and then away, quick. No smile, no sign of relief, just an acknowledgement that we'd arrived somewhere. I pushed the front door open and stepped aside. She didn't move. For a second, I thought maybe she'd turn right back down the road. But she stepped over the threshold, eyes darting across the walls, the stove, the table, like she was learning the shape of it all in case she had to leave fast. I pointed to the small room off the kitchen. "You can sleep there," I said. "There's a cot and a blanket. Water's in the pump out front. Help yourself." Nothing, not a nod, not a word. I didn't push it. I went to the stove, scraped together the last of the oats from the tin, and poured them into a pot. The fire caught slow, and I stood there watching the oats swell, thinking about how long it had been since I'd cooked for someone else. When the pot was done, I set a bowl in front of her. She sat, still silent, and picked up the spoon. She ate slow, like she wasn't sure if this was a test or if the food might disappear halfway through. I didn't watch her too close, just enough to know she was eating. I took my coffee out to the porch and sat in my old chair. The boards creaked under me, same as always. Out across the field, the light was going soft, the wind brushing through the dry grass with that tired sound it gets near the end of summer. And inside, the house sounded different. Not busy, not alive exactly, but different. There was a creak in the floor from the side room, then quiet. I pictured her sitting on the cot with her back to the wall, her bundle of things, if she even had any, close by. I wondered if she'd take her boots off. I wondered if she'd sleep. I thought about what I'd done. Was it legal? Was it smart? I didn't know. I didn't even know her last name. But for the first time in years, I hadn't stepped around someone else's trouble. I'd walked straight into it and brought it home with me. It had been 3 years since I'd buried my wife, 2 since I'd lost my boy. In all that time, no one had come down that road except the feed man and the debt collector. I'd told myself that was fine, that I preferred it that way. But sitting there listening to the faint sound of someone moving in the next room, I realized how long it had been since the house had another heartbeat in it. When the stars came out, I didn't light the lamp. I just sat there, mug in hand, feeling the weight of the day settle on me. The dust, the heat, the voice in the store, the girl's stillness. I knew tomorrow would come, whether I was ready for it or not. And with it, choices I hadn't had to make in a long time. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed listening to the wind, the old cottonwood groaning under the shifting air, and the faintest sound from the side room. A turn, a sigh, maybe. If you've ever had a stranger step into your life and shift the air without saying a word, you know what I mean when I say it's not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet that keeps you awake. And if you've followed me this far, I'd like to know, have you ever brought someone home when you didn't even know why? Leave me a comment about it. Click that like button if you think silence can speak louder than words. And if you want to hear how that first night turned into a life neither of us expected, you might want to subscribe. Because tomorrow morning is when the real change began. Morning came early, like it always does out here, but the light felt different. Maybe it was just me. I stepped outside before the sun had fully climbed over the hills, sleeves rolled to my elbows, boots damp with dew. The chicken coop had lost 2 more hens overnight, coyotes from the tracks I saw in the dirt. I didn't curse. There's no point in cursing a coyote for being a coyote. I just fetched a rusted shovel from the barn wall and started hauling some broken boards over to patch the fence. It was quiet work, the kind I'd been doing alone for years, the kind that didn't ask for conversation. And I didn't look back toward the house. Part of me half expected her to be gone. I wouldn't have chased her. I hadn't brought her here to own her. If she'd run, that would have been her choice. But when I came back in an hour later, I noticed something. The bowl I'd left on the porch from the night before was empty, a few crumbs clinging to the bottom. The cup beside it had been used. That told me she was still here. She didn't appear until midday. I was sitting at the table oiling the handle of a dull hatchet when I heard the floor creak. I didn't lift my head, just kept working. She crossed the kitchen, filled a tin cup with water from the basin, and drank it down in 2 long pulls. Her hands were dirty, fresh scratches on one arm. "You got scratched," I said. It was the first thing I'd said to her all day. She froze. Not like I'd startled her, but like she was bracing for something worse. Then she glanced down at her arm and shrugged. "They don't like being picked up." Her voice was rough, dry, like it had been waiting too long to be used. "No, they don't," I said. She turned like she might go back into the side room, but stopped, her eyes sliding toward the open door and the yard beyond. "You got a garden?" "Used to," I said. "Too dry now." She hesitated. "Chickens. What's left of 'em?" "What about 'em?" Another pause, then quiet. "You want help?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't want it, but because I hadn't expected the offer. "You don't have to," I said. "Not until you're ready." She didn't reply, just stepped outside and headed for the coop without another word. I watched from the corner of the barn window as she threw feed with both hands. Her movements were awkward, but there was a kind of determination in them. One of the hens pecked her leg hard enough to leave a mark, but she didn't flinch. Just kept going until the pan was empty. When she came back in, her face was red from the sun, the front of her shirt dark with sweat. She looked at me for a moment, then sat cross-legged in the corner and started peeling an onion with a small pocket knife she must have found in the drawer. "You cook?" I asked, careful not to make it sound like a challenge. She shrugged. Enough not to get yelled at. That night, we ate boiled potatoes and hard bread. She didn't talk, and I didn't ask about where she came from or who that man in town really was. Some truths don't need to be dragged into the light before they're ready. Before she went back into the side room, she paused by the door. "You gonna sell me back?" The question hit me in the chest. She asked it flat, like she'd asked it before to other men, expecting the same answer. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Ain't mine to sell." She nodded once. No thank you, no smile, and closed the door behind her. I stayed on the porch long after dark, the old chair creaking beneath me, staring out at the field. I tried to remember the last time someone had asked me something that mattered, something that carried weight. Couldn't think of one. That night, she didn't lock the door. If you've ever had a moment when someone let their guard down, just a fraction, and trusted you enough to leave a door open, you'll understand why I sat out there a little longer, letting the wind push at my sleeve and the night press in slow. And if you've been walking with me through this story so far, tell me in the comments if you've ever seen trust start in the smallest of ways. Hit that like button if you believe trust doesn't need big speeches to grow. And if you want to hear how this girl went from keeping her distance to planting her own roots here, you might as well subscribe. We're just getting started. The next morning didn't feel quite the same, not because the sun rose any different, but because the air inside the house wasn't as hollow. I stepped out of my room and noticed a clean tin cup sitting upside down on a rag beside the basin. I hadn't put it there. She hadn't said a word about it, but someone had bothered to wash it. Through the window, I saw her outside, barefoot in the dirt, scooping grain into a tin pan with a kind of quiet focus that made her look older than she was. She didn't seem to want to be seen, but she wasn't hiding either. I watched for a moment, then went back to fixing the busted porch rail. I still hadn't asked her where she came from. Didn't need to. Every bruise, every pause before she answered a question, every way she flinched when a door creaked too loud, it was all a kind of history no child should have to carry. If she ever wanted to speak it out loud, she would. Until then, I wasn't going to pry it out of her like it was owed. Later that afternoon, I came in from the shed carrying a sack of flour and found her at the small table near the stove. She was hunched over, a burnt matchstick in her hand, moving it back and forth across a scrap of paper. When she noticed me, she moved her arm quickly, trying to cover whatever she was working on. "You draw?" I asked. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the floor like she'd been caught breaking something. "Let me see." Reluctantly, she turned the paper toward me. It was rough, but I could see it plain. A sketch of a chicken coop in a house with a sloped roof. It looked like mine, only newer, tidier, not so tired. Beside it stood a big, full tree. "Used to be a cottonwood out back like that," I said. "You cut it down?" she asked. "No, lightning did. Took the whole top half clean off. It's still there, just not the same." She nodded once, folded the paper, and slipped it into her shirt pocket. No explanation, no asking what I thought. That evening, we worked side by side in near silence, cleaning out the old garden plot. The soil was dry and stubborn, clinging to rocks like it didn't trust the idea of growing anything again. She didn't complain, even when blisters started to bloom on her hands. I didn't tell her to stop. She was pushing herself, but it wasn't just for the sake of the work. There was something in her movements that looked like investment. Like maybe she was building something that could belong to her one day. We ate beans and cornbread for supper. She didn't look at me when she said, "I can stay a while, if you want." "That's up to you," I said. "I know, just saying." I didn't smile, not fully, but I felt something in my eyes soften. After we cleared the table, she glanced toward the faded photograph on the wall. It was me, younger, standing beside a dark-haired woman, our boy between us holding a wooden horse. "That them?" she asked. I nodded. "Wife and my son, David." "She's pretty." She was. "What happened?" I took a breath before answering. "Wife got sick, didn't get better. Boy caught a fever 2 springs later, wasn't much to be done." She didn't say she was sorry, didn't try to offer comfort she didn't know how to give. She just picked up the dishes and started washing them without another word. Outside, the wind had picked up, a few clouds gathered over the ridge but never opened. The land needed rain, but it would have to wait. I sat on the porch after she went to her room, the boards creaking under me like they had for years. Only now, the sound didn't echo quite so much. There was a cup drying on the counter, a folded drawing in her pocket, and dirt under her fingernails from a garden that hadn't seen hope in a long time. If you've ever lived long enough with just the sound of your own boots in the dirt, you'll know what I mean when I say even the smallest signs of another person's choice to be there. Not for debt, not for survival, but because they're willing to put their hands in the same soil as you, can feel like the start of something worth keeping. A few days passed, and the work started to find its rhythm. She didn't talk much, and I didn't push her to. Words weren't the measure I was using to see if she'd stay. It was in the way she moved around the place, less like a visitor, more like someone who knew where things were. I noticed it the day I found another sketch tucked under her elbow at the table. She hadn't heard me come in from the shed. I stood quiet for a second, watching her pencil work slow, careful lines. "What are you drawing?" I asked. She angled the page toward me without a word. It was the farm, or rather, what it could be. The porch boards were whole, no gaps between them. The roof was straight, shingles tight and even. A wind chime hung above the door, catching an invisible breeze. There was laundry on a clothesline, bright against the sky. And in the corner, a dog lay curled in the shade. "Is that us?" I asked. "It's how it could be," she said. Her voice was soft, like she didn't want the thought to break if she said it too loud. I stared at the drawing longer than I meant to. "It's a good picture," I told her. "Looks real." "Do you think it could be?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted past the paper to the field outside, to the barn roof that still leaked when it rained, to the garden we'd just begun to turn over. "If we stay," I said finally. "If we keep at it, I think we can." She nodded, folding the page neatly, as if it wasn't just paper but a plan she meant to carry with her. That afternoon, we worked the soil behind the house. She'd taken over a small patch for herself without asking. Onions, from the look of it. I didn't tell her to stop. She didn't ask if she could. That was the unspoken understanding between us. If something was worth doing, you just did it. There was something different in her movements now. Still quiet, still guarded. But her shoulders weren't bunched like she was bracing for someone to shout. Her steps didn't always aim toward the open road. That evening, after we'd washed up, she set something on the table in front of me. A small hand-sewn pouch with a drawstring. The stitches were crooked, but it held together. "It's for your tobacco," she said. "Your old one's falling apart." I blinked at it. I didn't use tobacco often, maybe once every other week, but she must have noticed. "Thanks," I said. "It's not much." "It is." She looked at me a moment longer than usual before turning back to the sink. Something about that look told me she wasn't just staying for food or safety anymore. There was something else forming, a kind of tether you don't get from being handed a roof over your head. As the sun dropped, we stood on the porch together. She didn't say anything, just crossed her arms and stared at the line of hills. The wind was soft, barely enough to stir the hair on her forehead. Then, from far off, the sound of hooves. We both turned. A single rider followed the creek road, not fast, not hiding. "Same man?" she asked. I watched the shape until it disappeared behind the ridge. "Looks like." "Should I go?" "No," I said immediately. "You stay." She didn't move closer to me, but she didn't step back either. When the rider passed without turning toward the farm, I felt her eyes on me, waiting for something I didn't say. Later that night, she moved her few things into a small sack and set it by the kitchen door. "Just in case," she said. I nodded. We didn't talk about it again. But I noticed the next morning she was in her patch early, barefoot in the dirt, pressing seeds into the ground like she meant to be here when they came up. If you've ever watched someone start planting in a place they're not sure they'll get to stay, you'll understand the strange mix of hope and hesitation it stirs in you. The rider didn't come up the path that day, but his shadow hung over the farm like a cloud that wouldn't move on. I kept catching myself glancing toward the creek road, scanning the hills, listening for the sound of hooves against dry earth. 3 days later, I had to go into town. We were low on salt, flour, and lamp oil. I told her to stay near the house, keep the door shut, and not answer if anyone came knocking. She didn't argue, just gave me a sharp, steady nod, the kind that says she'd already thought through what she'd do if trouble came. Dry wells looked the same as it always did, boards sunburnt to gray, dust curling along the street like it was hunting for a place to settle. The same men leaned against the rail outside the saloon, eyes following me the way they followed anyone who didn't stop to pass the time. Inside the general store, I started gathering what I needed, stacking each item on the counter. The clerk nodded in greeting, but his eyes kept darting to the window. It wasn't until I'd laid down the last item that he finally spoke. "That girl you got," he said, voice low. I paused, my hand halfway to my coin pouch. "What about her?" "Heard someone's been asking. Fella rode through yesterday, said she was his ward, claimed she ran off, described her as close enough." My jaw tightened. "You tell him anything?" "No," he said quickly, "but word moves." He leaned in a fraction. "Might circle back." I finished the transaction without another word, gathered the supplies, and stepped out into the heat. The air felt heavier than it had an hour ago. I didn't waste time getting back. When I topped the rise and saw the farmhouse, everything looked normal. The chickens were in the coop. The front porch had a broom leaned neatly against the wall. The dog bowl was full of water. She was sitting on the porch steps, legs tucked under her, sketchbook balanced on her knees. She looked up as I rode in. "Someone came by," she said before I could speak. I stopped mid-step. "Who?" Didn't give a name, just said he was looking for a girl, brown hair, scar on her arm. She rolled her sleeve up slowly, showing me the thin pale line curving along her forearm. I didn't ask where it came from. "What did you do?" I asked. "Stayed inside, watched from the window." He didn't get close, just asked the neighbor and rode on. I sat down beside her on the step, slow and heavy, my knees complaining. "You scared?" She didn't answer right away. "Not as much as I was last time." We sat in silence a while. Finally, I said, "If someone tries to take you, they'll have to go through me first." Her eyes flicked to mine. "You don't even know what I done, where I come from. Maybe I stole something. Maybe I ran off for a reason." "I don't care." "You should." "I don't." A pause hung between us. Then she asked, "You got a gun?" I nodded. "But I'm not fixing to use it unless I have to." She seemed relieved, not because I had one, but because I didn't want to. That night after supper, she sat by the door with her sketchbook. When she finally showed me the page, it was the two of us on the porch steps, the sky stretching wide behind us. "You can keep it," she said quietly. If anything happens. I looked at the drawing, then at her. Nothing's going to happen, I said. We'll handle it together. For the first time since she'd arrived, she went to bed without her boots on. Still, I didn't sleep much. My ears stayed tuned to the wind, waiting for the sound of hooves. In the morning, I found her outside early, barefoot in her patch of onions, pressing the soil down around each sprout, like she meant to see it grow. The shadow hadn't passed yet, but she was still here, and so was I. If you've ever lived with the sense that trouble is circling, you'll know how each quiet day feels like both a gift and a warning. It happened at high noon, the kind of heat that makes the air dance above the dirt and leaves every shadow sharp-edged. I saw him before he knocked, a bay horse, black saddle, coat dusty from long miles. Not the kind you get riding from the next town over, but the kind that settles in when a man's been looking for something too long. I stood at the front window, watching him dismount. He moved like a man, certain of his welcome. He wasn't rushing, wasn't hiding, just sure of himself in that slow, dangerous way. Stay put, I told her, setting my cup down on the table. No matter what. Then I stepped out onto the porch, letting the screen door close behind me like it was any other day. My stomach was tight, but it wasn't fear, it was the weight of knowing this was going to cost me something, one way or another. He tipped his hat as if we were old neighbors. Mornin', sir, name's Caleb Granger. His smile was wide, too wide, all teeth and no warmth. I'm here for my girl. She ain't yours, I said, flat. Granger chuckled, took a step closer. That's so, last I checked. I paid for her board, fed her, took care of her since she was a babe. That makes her mine. She told me she worked for scraps, slept in sheds. That don't make you family. You think you're better? His smile thinned, turned mean. You bought her same as I did. That one hit like a slap, because the truth was I hadn't rescued her through law or clean moral ground. I'd seen her there and acted. I hadn't asked her, I just did it. And now that act was being used against me. She's not for sale, I said, voice steady. And she's not going anywhere she don't choose to go. Granger's eyes narrowed. You really think some dried-up farmer out on the edge of nowhere is gonna win this? You got papers, guardianship, anything? All I gotta do is ride into town and say you kidnapped her, he added, letting the words hang heavy between us. Then go, I told him. That caught him off guard. Go, I said again, quieter this time, but not soft. Tell them what you're after. Let's see how many men tip their hats to a grown man claiming ownership over a child. He stepped closer, close enough for me to smell the dust on his coat. She's just a kid, he hissed. You think she's not going to turn on you the second she's hungry again? Behind me, the front door creaked. We both turned. She was standing there, boots on, shoulders squared, looking at him without a flicker of fear. You can go now, she said, voice clear, steady. Granger's eyes cut to her, something sharp behind them. You sure about that, girl? You know what happens when people get tired of feeding mouths they didn't make. I'd rather starve out here than go back to you. His jaw clenched. He looked at her, then at me, then back again. Whatever authority he thought he had wasn't landing. You're gonna regret this, he said finally, spitting into the dirt. Maybe not today, but when winter comes. When she leaves, she won't, I said. He stared at us for another long second, then turned and swung into the saddle. He didn't rush, but he didn't linger either. Rode off with that slow, steady gait, like a man who'd rather make you wonder if he's coming back than tell you straight. When the dust settled and the sound of hooves faded, she looked at me. You believe that I won't leave? I met her eyes. I believe you'll do what's right, and I can live with that. She didn't answer, just stepped inside, took 2 plates down from the shelf, and started setting the table for lunch like it was any other day. I stayed out on the porch a little longer, watching the road where he'd gone. The danger hadn't passed, I could feel it in my bones, but neither of us had run. And that counted for something. If you've ever had to stand between someone and the thing trying to take them, you'll know it's not just about the moment. It's about what comes after, when the dust settles, but you still can't quite unclench your hands. 8 days passed. We didn't speak Granger's name, but his shadow still lingered, stretching over every chore, every evening. At night, I kept the rifle close, still unloaded, but leaning within reach behind the door. She slept light, one ear tuned to the wind, waiting for hoofbeats that never came. We didn't talk about it. We just kept living. I repaired the eastern fence line, hammer in hand, nails between my teeth. She dug out a second garden bed without asking, planted corn in rows so straight they'd make a surveyor proud. I didn't stop her. Didn't even ask if she thought it would grow. Out here, you learn to respect anyone willing to put seed in the ground, no matter the odds. One morning, I found her sitting on the porch with her sketchbook open, pencil moving in slow, deliberate strokes. I sat beside her without asking, close enough to see the lines taking shape. "What's that?" I asked. "A house," she said, still drawing. It was ours, but not as it was. The roof was whole, the porch mended, a wind chime swinging above the door. There was laundry on a line, a dog sleeping on the steps. "Is that us?" I asked. "It's how it could be." I looked at it a long moment before I said anything. Not as a father, not as a guardian, just as someone who's here. That's a good picture. It looks real. "Do you think we could make it like that?" she asked. "If we stay," I told her, "and keep at it, I think we can." That afternoon, a boy rode down from Old Miller's place, dust rising behind him like a banner. He handed me a folded scrap of paper. The handwriting was spare, letters crooked from a man unused to writing. Man never came back, didn't ask again. I reckon he's done. Miller. I read it twice before handing it to her. She took her time, lips moving along the words. When she was done, she just nodded. No sigh of relief, no smile, just a quiet acknowledgement. It was over. From that day forward, the air felt lighter. Not by much, but enough to notice. I spent 2 days clearing out the old shed, patched the roof so it wouldn't leak come fall, built a small table from scrap wood, and set it under the window where the light fell soft in the afternoons. I didn't tell her it was hers, but she started using it like she knew. Next trip to town, I came back with a book, not a Bible, not a manual, but a tattered copy of Farming and Field Plan of the West. She read it every night, copying sketches into her notebook, making notes about soil types and planting seasons. Her handwriting was cramped but precise. Every morning she was up before the rooster, feeding chickens, checking the garden, looking at the sky like she could read its moods. Her steps had changed, purposeful now, not cautious. She didn't worry about making noise anymore. One evening after supper, while she was drying plates, she asked over her shoulder, "Can I stay here?" Then, before I could answer, she added, "I mean, for good." "You don't have to ask," I said. "This is your home now." She turned back to the sink, but I caught it. A small, tight smile that vanished as quick as it came, like she didn't want to show it. Later that night, she hammered a nail into the wall beside the old photo of my wife and boy. Hung a new drawing there, the house again, only more detailed now. Two people on the porch not far apart. She missed the nail once, smacked her finger, hissed, "Damn it," and laughed quietly to herself. I sat outside in the rocking chair, listening to that laugh, and smiled for the first time in years. The house felt alive again. There were footsteps on the floorboards, soup on the stove, and a sketch pinned to the wall beside a photo of what I'd lost. The porch light was still on when I turned in for the night. And if anyone asked years from now how she ended up staying on that farm with an old widower, the answer would be simple: because I told her she could. And for the first time in her life, she did. If you've ever felt the shift from waiting for trouble to finally letting your shoulders drop, you know what I mean by the weight lifting. By the time summer had worn itself thin and the light started leaning toward autumn, the place didn't feel like it used to. It wasn't louder, not exactly, but there was a pulse to it now, a kind of heartbeat I hadn't felt since before the cottonwood lost its top to lightning. She'd made it her own in ways I didn't see coming. A pair of boots tucked by the door, not mine. An extra cup drying on the counter most mornings. The faint scratch of pencil on paper drifting in from the table under the shed window where she liked to work. None of it was loud, but all of it said the same thing. She wasn't just passing through anymore. One evening, after supper, she set her fork down and asked, "Can I stay here?" Then, before I could answer, she added, "I mean, for good." I set my own fork down slow. "You don't have to ask," I told her. "This is your home now." She turned back to her plate like it was nothing, but I saw it, that small, tight smile she didn't want me to catch. Later that night, she brought a drawing out from her pocket. It was the house again, the one she'd been sketching and re-sketching since she first sat at my table. Only now it was more detailed. Porch boards straight, garden full, a dog asleep in the shade. Two people sat on the steps. I didn't need to ask who they were meant to be. She took a hammer from the drawer, found a bare spot beside the old photograph of my wife and boy, and tapped a nail into the wall. Missed once, smacked her finger. "Damn it," she hissed, then laughed quiet to herself. That laugh. It wasn't the kind you give a stranger or the kind you use to hide something. It was real. I sat in my chair on the porch, listening to her move about inside. The house felt alive again, not the way it used to be, but in a way I hadn't thought was possible anymore. The floorboards had company. The stove held the smell of something cooking most evenings. There were things in the house that didn't belong to me, and I was glad for it. When I turned in for the night, the porch light was still on. I didn't switch it off. Sometimes I think about how simple the truth of it was. Folks might ask years from now how that girl ended up staying on a worn-out farm with an old widower who had more ghosts than visitors. And the answer would be plain enough, because I told her she could. And for the first time in her life, she did. That's the thing about giving someone a place. Not just walls and a roof, but a place where they can set something down and know it'll be there tomorrow. You can't force a person to stay. You can't bargain them into belonging. You can only make the space and wait to see if they choose to fill it. She chose. And in choosing, she gave me something back I didn't realize I'd lost. The sense that this farm wasn't just the place where things ended, but where something could start again. I'd been a man who measured his days in fence posts and feed sacks, who thought silence meant safety. But I learned that silence can mean other things too. The scratch of a pencil in the next room, the sound of footsteps on the porch at dusk, the way a door stays unlocked at night because no one inside is waiting to run. If you've listened to all this, you already know this isn't just about me or her, and it's about what happens when you decide not to walk past someone else's trouble. It's about how sometimes you give without thinking, and it comes back to you in ways you couldn't have planned. She stayed. The house stayed alive, and I stayed open to the idea that even after years of emptiness, someone might still want to share the same patch of dirt, the same roof, the same quiet at the end of the day. So if you've made it this far with me, I'll ask you this. Have you ever told someone they could stay and meant more than just in your home? Have you ever been the one to stay even when you had every reason to keep going? Leave me a comment and tell me about it. Hit that like button if you believe a home is built on choice, not just shelter. And if you want to hear more stories like this, about the quiet ways people find each other out here, where the land runs long and the days are slow, then go ahead and subscribe. I've got more to tell, and maybe one of them will be about you.